When was David HaMelech born? When was David HaMelech's birthday? So the Rebbe said, since we know he passed away Shavuos, he must have been born Shavuos, because there's a chazaka that by tzaddikim, their years are perfect and whole. But we know so many tzaddikim that did not pass away on their birthday, so there's a reason. Lamashal, that Rambam passed away 83 days before his 70th birth. He would have completed 70 years. He would have gone into year 71. He was born, like the Rebbe says, the Siches, based on Sforim. Erev Pesach la'acharei Chatzeis Hayom. The Rambam's birthday is Erev Pesach. His Histalkos, his Yortzeit is Chof Tevis. If you do the math, it's Pei Gimel Yomim. It's 83 days. So the Rebbe says that the Chevron of the Pei Gimel Yomim is the Pei Gimel Sforim, the 83 Sforim that the Rambam wrote in the Sefer Mishnah Torah. So there's reasons. In other words, tzaddikim live perfect years. If they're not perfect years, you don't know how to count, But with the Mittler Rebbe, you don't know how to count for it to be perfect years, because he literally passed away on his birthday. The Mittler Rebbe lived 54 years, Nun Dalet Shana, Miyem El Yem. He was born on Tes Kislev, and his Estalkos, his Elul, was 54 years later, also on Tes Kislev. The next day is his Chag HaGeula. That it's a big Chag HaGeula. I mean, the Rebbe verbringt on Yud Kislev, not every year, but in the later years, the Rebbe verbringt Yud Kislev. And of course, the big question is, why is Yud Kislev, which is the Chag HaGeula of the Mittler Rebbe, not the same shturim as Yud Tes Kislev, which is the Chag HaGeula of the Alter Rebbe? And the answer is complicated. In other words, the specifics of the answer are complicated. But the answer, Bekitzer, is that his Gula was not a Gula Shlema. The Mittler Rebbe was let go. The noose over his neck, the koiler al tzavare, was still there. So he was physically redeemed, but he wasn't finished with the parsha. And based on documentation and other various kinds of evidence, it seems that the vort is that the Mittler Rebbe's vindication happened after he passed away. He passed away Tes Kis of Tov Kuf Peches in the year 1827, and mamish a few days after, the government closed this case. They used to say, Amol, that the reason was that he passed away the day before what would have been his first Chag HaGeula. But there was always a suffix, which has now been cleared up, that he was actually released 2 years before his Histalkos. So there was an occasion to celebrate his Chag HaGeula in Tafkuf Pei Zayin. And evidently, and I'm saying that evidently because I'm not sure, this is what it seems, the reason it was not celebrated is because there was not a Gula Shlema. And he was not fully redeemed until after his Histalkos. So Yud Kislev never had a chance to become the Yom Tov, the Moyed, that Yud Tes Kislev became. There's a word from the Mittler Rebbe, which is brought from Chassidim, not from the Rabbeim, that the Mittler Rebbe said that Avraham Avinu was given two breides. Avraham was given two choices. Golus or Yisurim, to go into Golus or to suffer. The Tatat of Zechirum and Golus, my father, the Alter Rebbe, took upon himself Golus. I meant to go to jail. Upon him, as famid is geblieben the zweite Brede. Evidently, I was left with the second option. And the way the Vort is brought, the second option meant the shortening of his life. The Mittler Rebbe passed away at a young age. He was 54 years old. Now, the story that revolves around the Histalkos of the Mittler Rebbe, which was yesterday, is that there's a sefer called Migalois, which has the whole Rishima from Chassidim who were actually physically Chassidim of the Mittler Rebbe. In other words, it was written then that the Mittler Rebbe said that there was an occasion, I don't know what the occasion was, where he was mishtashea with Chassidim b'divrei Elokim Chayim. He was rejoicing, he was playing, he was having fun, as much as you could say that, with his Chassidim about the inyan of Elokus, Divrei Elokim Chayim Chassidus. Meaning the Mittler Rebbe was with his Chassidim, and he was saying Chassidus, and he and the Chassidim were together in this experience, and it brought out an incredible simcha by the Mittler Rebbe. Which, by the way, is a window into the Chassidim of the Mittler Rebbe. The Friediger Rebbe said, what the Mittler Rebbe gave his Chassidim, no Rebbe gave. The Friediger said, what the Mittler Rebbe gave seine Chassidim, hat kein Rebbe seine Chassidim nicht gegeben. The Friediger Rebbe said, the Mittler Rebbe's Chassidim hat nicht ausgefällt Mashiach. The Mittler Rebbe's Chassidim were not missing Mashiach, because in the Divrei Elokim Chayim, in the Chassidus that they had from their Rebbe, they had Mashiach. And it wasn't because the Rebbe gave it. is because they were able to take it. The Mittel Rebbe had a collection of hundreds of Chassidim, maybe even thousands, who he raised up in terms of Haskalah of Chassidus, understanding Chassidus Chabad. And I guess to some extent, to a greater extent, to a lesser extent, also the Avodas HaTefillah al Derech HaChabad, to such an extent that they were not in this world. I always think of the Mittel Rebbe's Nesiyah. It was very short. It was a mamish of bubble. It's very hard to call the Mittel Rebbe's generation Tachtonim. He took them to another level, to another place. So the Mittel Rebbe describes, he was sitting with Chassidim, and he was saying Chassidus, and they were farbringing together, and Yoni Avoida. And there was an enormous amount of simcha in this event. And the Mittel Rebbe says, suddenly I see my father, the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe says to me, Simcha zu mahi yoyse, why are you so happy? So the Mittel Rebbe said, why am I so happy? I'm surrounded by Chassidim, whose whole mitzvah is Avodas HaTefillah, and Divrei Elokim Chaim, Chassidus. And we're Mishtashei and Divrei Elokim Chaim, and Chassidus, and Pnimius HaTorah. So we're in a higher state, in a Ruchniistic state. So B'mel, there's an unbelievable simcha. So the Alter Rebbe said to the Mittel Rebbe, don't you know that L'mayla there's a Gzeira, that they're going to be taking away Yiddish Kinderlach for forced service in the Russian army for generations, for decades? How could you be so besimcha? And then the Alter Rebbe disappeared. So I guess you could say that the simcha was nepach le'evel. I don't know how the Mittel Rebbe responded. I don't know what the Mittel Rebbe showed his Chassidim. But this is a story. 7 years pass. 7 years pass. And again, this all the Mittel Rebbe is telling. He was surrounded by Chassidim, and they were mishtasheh with Divrei Teiren, Divrei Chassidus, Divrei Elokim Chayim, Dach, Divrei Elokim Chayim. And there was an incredible simcha. And again he sees his father, the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe says to him a second time, Simcha zu ma'azu oise, what are you so happy about? He says, what do you mean? I'm surrounded by Chassidim. We're in a higher world. We're involved in the Lakus, Divrei Elokim Chayim. Alter Rebbe said, but I already told you that there's a Gezerah, they're going to take away Jewish children for 25 years of service in the Russian army. How are you so happy? So the Mittel Rebbe said to his father, so much time passed since you told me about the Gezerah, I thought the Gezerah was bottled. And the Alter Rebbe says, no, the Gezerah is a Chai V'Kayim, as they say. It's very, very much alive. And then the Gezerah Taka happened. The Gezerah the Kantanist. So Koydem Kol, I just want to mention this, that the Mittel Rebbe said a Maimer and wrote a Maimer. I think he wrote it, but the Maimer is now in print, like all my Maimerim of the Rabbeim, that for hundreds of years we heard stories, now you can read them in books. The Mittel Rebbe actually said a Maimer, it's not such a long Maimer, which begins, Lahavin inyin lekichas anshe chayil mebnei Yisrael, where the Mittel Rebbe explained Al Pi Chasidus why there would be such a Gzeira, where they take children, kinderlach, out of their homes. You know how it worked? 25 years they were being trained. And then the service began. You know, they were called, I met Alter Litvische Yidden who remember such people, Nikolaevsky Soldaten, Nikolai, Yemach Shmei, he was a big Russian Nikolai. Nikolai's soldiers, they were considered the best soldiers in the Russian army. They served for 35, 40 years. They were career soldiers. Their whole life was service to the Russian army. When they came out of their service, they were prosta mentioned. They knew just how to be soldiers. They were great soldiers. They knew how to die. They knew how to stand and fight when bullets were flying. But they didn't know how to live amongst people. They had no gzeiros of tchum. They could live any place they wanted in Russia. So they settled in parts of Russia where Jews were not allowed to settle. And they brought Rabbanim. There were kehilas, there were communities just of Nefkelaitim, just of these Cantonisten. And some of the Rabbanim that they had were Lubavitch Chassidim. The Tzemach Tzedek said about the Kantonisten, as they werden alle starben by the Tshuva. The Tzemach Tzedek said about the Kantonists that they were going to die by the Tshuva. So first let me finish the Maimer. So the Mittel Rebbe said a Maimer Chasidus, which the Rebbe repeated in Tov Chav Dalet, 1964. Pashat Yisrei, the Rebbe said this Maimer. It was a very unusual Shabbos. The Rebbe Fabreng Demot, he says, because there's 3 Orchim. One is a Yid who was never in Lubavitch. The second is a Yid who came from Russia, who just left Russia recently. And the third is a Yid who came from Russia a long time ago. In other words, there was 3 kinds of Chassidim that all had collected by the Rebbe. One was a new chassid, one was an old chassid who left Russia a long time ago, and one was an old chassid of Russia recently. The chassid who had never been to Russia was Zalman Jaffe, Olav Shalom. The chassid just recently left Russia was Reb Mendel Futafas. And the third was, I think, Fola Khan. And the Rebbe spoke about like three kinds of chassidim, And the Rebbe verbringt, and he said a maimer. And the maimer, in the maimer, the Rebbe, so to speak, chazed, he repeated the teuchen of the maimer of the Mittel Rebbe, in the Kirchas Hanshachal. When the Rebbe said the maimer, no one knew such a maimer existed. Now you can buy it in a book, you can print it. It's gedruckt, you can es kaufen, schwarz auf weiß. A kid said, what was the teuchen of the maimer? What did the Mittel Rebbe say in his maimer? Why they make such gezeres on Yidden? So he said that sometimes the Yidden are living in Golus, and it's comfortable. And because it's comfortable, Yiddishkeit becomes very natural. And there's a cloud whether Yidden really care about it. Or it's just mitzvah nashim ulumad, that this is the habit, this is what they become accustomed to. So the Eibishter sends a gzera, so that Yidden should show the Kerech HaMesiris Nefesh, and you see that Yidden really care about Torah mitzvahs. That's how the Mittler Rebbe explained then, you're talking now, the 1820s, the reason for this gzera. So the Rebbe repeated this maimer in the 1960s. And he said this in the maimer, but along with the maimer there were sichas, that there's a limit to the test, there's a limit. At some point, is Mishanayis geprooft, we've been tested enough times, we've shown our loyalty, and now it becomes counterproductive. It becomes, like the Rebbe spoke about polishing the buttons, Polishing the buttons is an avodah that has to happen before Mashiach. But the Rebbe says you can ruin the finish. If you polish the buttons too much, you can ruin the finish. And the Rebbe said a similar word about this here maimer. And the end of the story is that when the Gezerah actually came to fruition, it happened. Nikolai, Yamach Shemai, was a big, big Russia. Nikolai. I might as well tell you this maiser. When the Alter Rebbe was in Petropavlovsk, that was arrested. Nicholas was a boy. Nikolai was a boy. He was a prince. He was the son of a king. And he was a big achzer. He was a cruel person by nature. He wasn't just an anti-Semite. He was just a cruel person. And he had a lot of power. And he was carrying a bullwhip. I don't know what you call it. A whip that you hit a horse. There's probably a kanchik. It's called in Yiddish. And he was in the same room as the Alter Rebbe. And he raised up his bullwhip to hit the Rebbe with the kanchik, and it hurt. It would have hurt. The Alter Rebbe looked at him. He became full of aim of a fachet. He dropped the whip and he ran out. He became very afraid. Again, this is a word from Chassidim. It's not in the Sichos. And the Chassidim say that this made Nikolai less of a Russian. Which tells the Chvaron the roof. Nikolai, he was a king for a long time. He was a smart man. He wasn't a shaita. The second Nicholas was a big tippish. He was very, very smart. But he was mamish and achzer. He had mishigasim. Nikolai, you hear the stories about the Russian Tsar who would go out amongst the people and dress up like a commoner to hear what people are saying about him. This is this Nikolai. And he made the Gezerah of the continents for many, many decades. I don't know, 30 years, more, 40 years. They took Yiddish kinder for forced service in the Russian side when they were before Bar Mitzvah, 8, 9, 10 years old. 25 years was the training, and then started the service. And there's a lot of stories about the Nikolaevsky soldat, about the Kantonist. So the Mittel Rebbe said, "Ich kenn das nicht." I don't want to spend the whole class on this. Last week I spent the whole week. Ich rede schon 14 Minuten. The Mittel Rebbe said, "I can't do this. I can't do this." And by the way, the Rebbe Rashab said the same thing about the Soviets. When the Soviets came into Rostov, the Rebbe Nishmasein said, I think he said the same lashon, "Ich kenn das nicht. I can't deal with this." So the Mittler Rebbe traveled to the Alter Rebbe in Hadish. Alter Rebbe's seen in Hadish. And he came out and he said, "The Tat hat mir abgesagt from the Rabbanis. My father freed me from the Rabbanis." Nobody thought for a minute that this meant Histalkos. It didn't cross their mind. They figured that it meant that the Mittler Rebbe was going to move to Eretz Yisrael. The Mittler Rebbe was very, very involved in Eretz Yisrael. The Mittler Rebbe the Alter Rebbe sent Chassidim to Eretz Yisrael. The Mittler Rebbe sent more. And the Tzemach Tzedek sent more yet. There was a whole yishuv of Anash, of Chabad Chassidim of Eretz Yisrael, which was supported by what we now call Koil Chabad. I mean, it was called Koil Chabad then also. But the Mittler Rebbe was Hu b'mizrach ve'ena b'mayrev. The Gemara says, the Mittler Rebbe had his eyes. The Mittler Rebbe very focused on Eretz Yisrael, and the Chassidim knew it. And they figured that he's going to go to Eretz Yisrael. They never dreamed infinite stalkers. Anyway, he left Hadich, he started traveling back to Lubavitch, and en route he got sick. He ended up in Nezhin, and the doctors examined him, and the doctor said that he has problems with his lungs and he's not allowed to speak. What the doctors could not understand was the Mittler Rebbe was born with problems with his lungs, and how he Bechlau spoke Alachas Kama Vakama to speak Chassidus for hours and hours, one of the great ploys of Tamim Deim. And the doctors told him that he's not allowed to talk at all. So he went into a coma. In a coma, it's comatose. And he laid in the coma for a week. And then one doctor says to another doctor, Kumichel device not kunz, you want to see a miracle, watch. And he whispered into the Mittler Rebbe's ear that the doctors had another meeting, and they changed their diagnosis, and that it's okay if he speaks. So he sat up. He woke up, and he said they should bring him his big day Shabbos. The Mittler Rebbe wore white, big day Shabbos, silk. I had opportunity yesterday to look up in the Rebbe's Rishimis about this, because I was looking for something else. In the Rebbe's Rishimis HaYuman, and it says there that the first three Rabbeim, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, wore big day love, and they wore white. Before they were Eila Lekas HaNesiyas, they wore Arba Begodim, like a Kain Hedyot. Afterwards, they wore Shmoyne Begodim. The Rabbeim, when they were Rabbeim, wore 8 garments of white linen, pishtan, linen. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, heard this from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe writes notes on what Frierdiker Rebbe. Does it include the socks? Does it include the talis cotton? What's the cheshbon of the Shmoyne Begodim? But the Rebbeim wore 8 outfits, 8 garments of white, like a Kain Gadol, once they were the Kassanasiyas. The Rebbe Marash wore white, mizman lezman, occasionally. The Rebbe Rashab didn't wear white ever, and this is how the minig has come down to us. The Rabbeim, we know, only wore black. But the first 3 Rabbeim, the Nesiim, wore big day lover. So the Mittler Rebbe looked like a malach. He looked like a malach. And he started saying Chassidus. Right? Yesterday in a coma, today he's saying Chassidus. And this went on for a whole week. Till came his birthday, was Tes Kislev. Tes Kislev, he verbringt the whole night with Chassidim, a ganze Nacht verbracht. And he kept on asking Im Allah HaShochet, if it's morning. At some point during that night, the Mittler Rebbe went into a trance. And he was completely not in this world. Completely not in this world. And the Chassidim became very afraid. But the Mittler Rebbe, his trances are famous. The Mittler Rebbe's trances are famous, but he did it in his room. When the Mittler Rebbe was in a trance, he could be standing in the middle of a cheder, and he was not here, Bagal. His shamash would pick him up and move him around the room. He wasn't Margish. He was not Bechlal in this world. But this was in public, in front of all the Chassidim, after having been so sick just a week before. And the Chassidim panicked. So they started to move the furniture around, to make noise, to wake him up. When this didn't help, they started Pashat screaming. And it was mamish a crescendo. The Chassidim were screaming that the Chassidim cannot see this. We're not kalim for this. The Rebbe is frightening us. And the Rebbe should only do such things behind closed doors. And eventually the Mittler Rebbe came back. And he sat up. So when he sat up, the Chassidim asked the Mittler Rebbe, see, the Rebbe gehert, was man geschrien, and the Rebbe heard what the Rebbe was saying, and the Rebbe said, ich habe gehert. Was tut azah heich in Neshama in azah niederike Welt? What is such a lofty soul doing in such a lowly world? This is what he heard. And he continued saying Chassidus. And in the middle of one of the Maimorim, and I think some of these Maimorim, we have anochas of them even, gedruckt heint, in Migdaleis, and then maybe they reprinted in the Maimorim in the quotation, but I'm not sure about it. He said, and he stopped talking. Right, that with you, tafel, bottle to the Eibush, there's Moker Chaim is the source of life. Mechaya Chaim gives life to all living things, and he stopped. So the Olam thought that the Rebbe had sich verdweket, he interrupted, and he'll come back soon. And that was his Nistalkas. The Mittler Rebbe was Nistalik, surrounded by his Chassidim, in the middle of saying Divrei Elokim Chaim, and the last word that came out of his mouth was Chaim. Now if you know the Gemara, you have a story about Reb Meir, you have a story about Rabbi Bar Nachmani, that Yotzes on Nishmosei B'Tahara, B'Toher, they said Toher and they were Nistalik. The Mittler Rebbe Nistalik is the word Chaim. This is the same Nistalkos that you have in Zoyar. I once taught it here, I once brought it in the Idra Zuta in the description of how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai passed away, it's quite disturbing because Rashbi called together the remaining members of the Idre. There had been 10 members of the Idre. And the first time that Rashbi made an Idre, they all got together and he said Satira, and 3 of them were Oila Besara Hashamayma, they had Aliyah Sanshama, they had Histalkus in the Idre, Misas Nishikin. So there were 7 left. He called them back and said, let's do it again, but this time I'm going to be Oila Besara Hashamayma. Now I don't know how you react to that kind of Besura. They all got together, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said Teira, and there's Neshama Besara Hashamayma. He describes in detail, and he also, it says Lashon, he said the word Chaim, and that was it. And he was able to tell. So the Mitzamach Tzedek wrote about the Histalkos of the Mittel Rebbe that Azam mean Histalkos is Nidgivem Meisa Rashbi. This kind of Histalkos of a tzaddik has not been since the times of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now the story that goes with it is this, that the Mittel Rebbe told the Chassidim to be besimcha. So they went to his levaya singing and crying. The Rebbe Gehasen Freilach sein. That's how the story goes. The Histalkos of the Mittel Rebbe. I want to stop right now. I just want to say that today is not the Histalkos. Yesterday was the yard site. Today is the Chag HaGeula. So the story behind this, just one nekuda, is that the Mittel Rebbe was in house arrest. He was invited to Vitebsk. And it says in Hayom Yom specifically how he traveled. He stopped in a number of different cities. Every city he stopped in, he said Chassidus. When he came to Vitebsk, which was the capital of the state where the Mittel Rebbe lived, where Lubavitch was, so they gave him permission to have a minyan 3 times a day, with 30 men for each tefillah. And they gave him permission to say Chassidus 3 times a week, with 50 men for each Amiras Dach. He said Chassidus. So Tes Kislev that year was Shabbos, like this year, Tes Kislev was Shabbos. And Shabbos afternoon, they came in to tell him that he's free to leave. But the government decided that letting him go. But when they walked in, they saw the concentration. The Mittel Rebbe was speaking. And the Chassidim were in total dveikus. The Mittel Rebbe's Chassidim's ability to listen and to concentrate was Gor Anandezach. He raised them up amazingly. So they Pasha did not interrupt. And he said a Maimach Chassidus, which we now also have in print, Ata Echad V'Shimcha Echad Mich Amcha Ki Yisrael Ge'echad, the Tefillah of Minchas Shabbos. And in my modern quotation, the Mittel Rebbe, this Maimach is also printed. The Rebbe said a number of times Ata Echad. At least 2 or 3. The Rebbe said Mamar Ata Echad. And you have also in the Friedrich Rebbe Mamar Tes Kislev Ata Echad. By the time we finished with the Maimach, it was already much of Shabbos. So they didn't tell him after Shabbos, so the Chag HaGeula becomes Yud Kislev. So there's a connection between Tes Kislev and Yud Kislev. But these 2 dates are connected to the Mittel Rebbe. And the Mittel Rebbe's whole Metzias was, the word that he said, my taiva is, at 2 junge Leute sollen sich treffen, soll man reden Yechudi Allah. The Mittel Rebbe said that his great desire is that when 2 Chassidim should meet, they should speak in Yom Yechudi Allah. The Mittel Rebbe was not Oisek in Nigla. He was a Goan Oilam in Nigla, but he was not Oisek in Nigla. He didn't write his own tshuvas. He asked the Tzemach Tzedek write the tshuvas for him, v'chuli v'chuli. And when he was asked why, he said, "Mein taiva is at 2 junge Leute sollen reden, Yechudi Allah, Ti'ata Kenarech." The Mittel Rebbe wanted his Chassidim's gossip to be Divrei Elikim Chaim, Dach, Chassidus. Well, that's how it was. That's how it was. He raised up his Chassidim to an incredibly high madrega. Tzemach Tzedek became Rebbe was a big disappointment. Because they went from being saturated with Chassidus for hours and hours and hours to a Rebbe says Chassidus once a week for less than an hour. It was such a anticlimax. It was such a setback compared to what they were used to. And when they complained, the Tzemach Tzedek said, I'm not my shver, I'm not my father-in-law, I'm a different Rebbe, a different door. Okay, Rabbi Yossi, let us learn Tanya, which is why people came here. It's Taki Yud Kislev, it's a Chag HaGeula. And maybe before the Hayom Yom, I'll talk a little bit more about Yud Kislev.
You talk about the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim. You usually say they're like, there were no other Chassidim like that in there.
It's true.
Now you're saying about the Mittel Rebbe's Chassidim.
Again, you're asking me my opinion. Because more than my opinion, I can't give you.
What you tell us.
Right. So my point is, Azay Leitzach Bamir, the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were Anoshim Shleimim. They were complete. Which meant they were also normal. To be a big person whose life is Dveikis Nelakus, and to be Mfanas B'nei Beisei, and to be, I hate to use this expression, but to got into light, you have to be extraordinarily great. They were very whole, they were very healthy. The Mittel Rebbe came right after a terrible war. We don't understand how tragic, how devastating the war with Napoleon was in White Russia. He destroyed everything. And he picked on the Chassidim. Because Yidden Beklal supported Napoleon, the Alter Rebbe supported Alexander. So when the French were retreating, when they were losing, and they were running out of Russia, they did damage in those parts of Russia where they knew the Chassidim lived. And the Misnagdim lived there also. But the generation, we think of the Holocaust as being, the Satmar Rebbe said that the Holocaust was a Yerida like 300 generations. 300 days, the difference before and after. In Gemara, the Gemara says, whenever you want to say a guzma, you use the number 300. So I think that's why he used that number. But the difference between Chassidus today and Chassidus they use in Europe, it can't compare. I'm not going to say that the distance between the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim and the Middle Rebbe's Chassidim is as great as what Chassidus was in the old country. This is a Yerida that's historic, the Holocaust. But the difference of the world between the Alter Rebbe's times and the Middle Rebbe's times is impossible to understand. Just the poverty alone, just the physical poverty. They were so poor. The Middle Rebbe's Chassidim were incredible in one way. And in that one way, they probably exceeded even the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. But they were not Anashim Shleimim. They were like, in one area, in the area of Haskalah, the Middle Rebbe was Haskalah. The Lashon, the Frierdiker Rebbe Sichas says the Alter Rebbe gewollt heart, so the Middle Rebbe gemont kop. Alter Rebbe wanted from the Chassidim this heart, and the Middle Rebbe wanted the mind. So I always understood that the Alter Rebbe wanted also hearts. Also, but I saw a Sicha from the Rebbe, Nishka Mugedike, where the Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe wanted the heart, meaning to say, not so much the mind. In the terms of learning Chassidus, a person learns Chassidus. You become a chassid from learning Chassidus. You don't become a chassid from learning Chassidus. You become a chassid from davening. Unless you learn so much that you're shaken with it. That was the Middle Rebbe's Chassidim. The amount of Chassidus he gave them, and the way he gave them that Chassidus, and what he'd expected from them, I would say that the Middle Rebbe's Chassidim had shalom bayis issues. I'm saying they were not necessarily the best husbands, they were not necessarily the best fathers. You must understand, it was 15 years. It's a tiny window in time. And when the Middle Rebbe started, it was still noch b'medida v'agbala. The Middle Rebbe's years of saturation is not 15 years, it's probably half that. But there was a period of time that the Middle Rebbe took regular men, regular people, and he saturated them with Haskalah of Chassidus to such an extent that they became the Chassidus they were learning. And in this way, you could say that by the Alter Rebbe it wasn't either. So this is the difference. You're asking a question, I'm giving you an answer, but it's Laniya's daiti. It's how I understand it based on what I read. I wasn't there, and if I was there, you think I would understand. This is not a Sicha from Frierdiker Rebbe. It's the way I see it, the way I understand it, based on what I've read. You understand? Okay. Let's learn Tanya. Now, I just want to say this to you. I want to start with this. That we're talking about a concept which is called Ava Mesoteres, a hidden love. Okay, for those who want the place, we're on page Chafei Amud Aleph. That means page 49, the bottom of the page someplace. Ava Mesoteres doesn't make any sense. Hidden love is not the same thing as hidden treasure. Hidden treasure from a Gemara that the Ashmedai was walking with Yob and Yayoda, and they passed a man who had special kelim, had special tools to look for treasure. And Ashmedai watched this man looking for treasure. Ashmedai was the king of the demons, the Melech HaShedim. And he started laughing. So later on, when Bnei Yob and Yayoda asked him what was the significance of the laugh, so he said he was looking for treasure on the other side of the world, and underneath his feet was a huge treasure. So a oitzer nister, a oitzer bolum, a hidden treasure I get. But hidden love, if you love and you don't know you love, then you don't love. It's a hidden love. Hidden love doesn't make any sense. So the Alter Rebbe explains hidden love. And I suppose in the human experience, hidden love is between parents and children, and to a different way, different degree also between siblings. Because they have a kesher atzmi, they have a bond which is on the level of etzem. So therefore they have an ava atzmi, so a love at the level of etzem. So it's possible that you should love your brother and sister. Outwardly you can't stand him, but underneath it all you really love him. But what does it mean, the ava must send us to the Eibishter? And the Alter Rebbe said, the big code to this here Perek Yutes is the word golus and shina, exiled and asleep. A yid who's a roshas neshama is in exile, he's trapped. But a yid who's a rab with neshama is in exile has a pintele, which is called chokhmah, which is never exiled. It's only sleeping. It cannot be exiled. And this pintele, this nakud at this point, which can never be exiled, only asleep, is woken up when a person is tested about matters of faith. That's why you could say by Yid Ava Musteres, the biggest Rosh. The terminology inside is Kalsha Bakalam and a Peishi Yisrael. Kalsha Bakalam means Aglaich Gilta Kerid. He has no feelings, complete apathy. Peishi Yisrael means Atzalochesnik, a wanton sinner in spite. You're not going to call them good Jews, not a Kalsha Bakalim, and certainly not a Peishi Yisrael. Even a Kalsha Bakalam Peishi Yisrael, whose neshama is completely ghost. He's completely lost control. He's a slave. A Rosh is controlled by the Yetzer Hara. He's a prisoner. Has a point which is never exiled. He's never lost control of it. It's only in a maimed the matzah of shin. It's only sleeping. And quote, all you have to do, end quote, is wake it up. And what wakes it up? This is the conversation. So last week we learned this, but it had so little time. So but come down learned. So I want to learn it again. They'll probably learn it again. I'll do the same mistake I did last week. I'll end up repeating. I spent 25 minutes talking about the Mittler Rebbe, which is not a bad thing, but we're supposed to learn Tanya. So let's see if we can cover more ground. Okay? So we're on page Chav Hey Amar Aleph. Okay? Ach kesheboyim lidei nisoyin b'dvar amuna b'deshem echad. It's 12 lines into the page, or 10 lines into the page Chav Hey. The line begins with the word B'daitam. Tell me when you have the place. You have the place, yeah? However, the reason we say that there could be a Yid who's such a big Yerusha that his neshama is completely ghost, he has lost control. And nevertheless we say that even he has an Ava B'Soteres. The reason is because the Pintel Yid, the way it is in the Chochmah Shebemeach Sheberash, is never in Golos, it's only asleep. What wakes it up? A moment of Mesiras Nefesh. I want you to know, historically, we learned about this in chapter 18, there were Yidden who crossed lines. There were Yidden who did Avodah Zarah also. There were Jews who were so assimilated that when they were told to do Avodah Zarah, they did it also. You know what woke up their neshama? When they were told to hurt another Jew. Every Jew has a trigger, as far and as fallen and as exiled as his neshama may be. A Yid has a point, and when you push the point past that, when you push the Yid past that point, all of a sudden he doesn't become a little bit conscientious. He becomes conscientious to the point of Mesiras Nefesh, and the Yid is ready to die al Kiddush Hashem for the koytzesh Yud, for the smallest thing. Let's read it. When a Yid is tested b'dvar amunah about something which touches his amunah. What does Emunah mean? Emunah means, Rabbi say, a connection to the Eibishter, which is without reason and higher than reason. That's the Taich Emunah. I have a relationship with Hashem which does not pass through my brain. It comes directly from my neshama. That's called Emunah. And when a Yid is tested about a matter of Emunah, Sheilamayla mehadas, which is above understanding, meaning to say, our Emunah relationship with the Eibishter, not only does it not come from the mind, it has nothing to do with the mind, and it's actually higher than what the mind could know. And when this test happens, when a Jew is tested, and the nature of the test is his pintela. I used to go on Mivtzayim 40 years ago, with a Chavrusa, he was crazy then, he's crazier now, Baruch Hashem, he was a Chassidish bocher ad mitzah nefesh. Mamish, he was a Chassidish bocher ad mitzah nefesh. We went on Mivtzayim on Wilshire Boulevard, Beverly Hills. It was not a fun place to go on Mivtzayim. Ered Yefifen of the Welt, wow. We went into movie theaters to put film on people. I had a hard time with it. But he had a shtick. He would ask people, are you Jewish? And they would say no. So he would say to them, you're not a Jew. He did this as a matter of course. And the reactions were amazing. I've never seen anything like it. Are you Jewish? They would say no, and he would simply say, you're not a Jew. And they would get so upset. They would get so upset. I'm a Jew, and boy off. I was, at that time, I was literally 15. I was 16. I was a little boy. And it didn't happen once. It happened, it was amazing for me to witness. You know, everything you read about in the books. You see it on the streets of Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. A person is comfortable saying, I'm not Jewish, but you should tell him he's not a Jew. What's the difference? He just told you I'm not Jewish. Because when he said it, he crossed his fingers. When you gave it back to him, you made him hear what he just said, and he couldn't take it. And I'm telling you, I promise you, it didn't happen once. It happened maybe 20 times. I went to Mitzvah with him for a few months. It wasn't shaykh to go to Mitzvah with him for too long, because he explained he was on a different level. He really was. He still is on a different level. You're not a Jew. The reactions were visceral. Mamish. This is what the Rabbi say. A Yid can accept all. You'll see it later in chapter 24. Mitzvah Hashem, we'll get to it. A Yid can do any Aveda and tell himself, Ruach Tus, I'm still a good Jew. I didn't have others. But when you touch that nerve, where a Yid is going to cross that line, and once he crosses that line, he has to say to himself, I crossed over from the side of Yehudi to the side, the Ever HaYarden, the Ever HaNor, the Zweite Seite. He cannot do it. I told this to you recently. My brother, like Gesundten Stark, works for Aleph, and he was on a phone call with a man who you may remember his name on the radio many years ago. His name is Ron Kubi. Ron Kubi is a Jew who's he's such a bad Jew by our definitions. He's such a poiker. He's such a troublemaker. If you work for Aleph, you try to help prisoners. He's also trying to help prisoners. And my brother, who's younger than I am, so they were on the phone, my brother and this client and his lawyer. He said, my lawyer is a very good lawyer. He's Mesa Nefesh for me to get me out of jail. His name is Ron. So my brother got very excited because when he was a little kid, he listened to Curtis and Kubi. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. I don't know if it's a good thing that I'm mentioning, it's a bad thing that I'm mentioning it. And Ron Kubi couldn't believe that he's working with Orthodox rabbis, like Via Vesa Toma, on helping people get out of jail or whatever, to commute their sentence or change their sentences. It's a whole avodah that they do. And he said to my brother, see, this is the thing about the Jews. No matter what, we're there for one another. Again, I was on the phone call, but he immediately my brother sent us all a message telling us the story. I don't know if you appreciate wie frei der Mensch is. And it was a big admission. It was a big admission. I'm not going to say that it was a gil v'chidish of a nefesh, but it was a moment of truth for such a man. This is what the Alter Rebbe says, when a Yid is touched to the Nikud of Chachma, so all of a sudden, yesterday he was so disinterested, he was apathetic, he was spiteful, he was a wanton sinner. And today, his neshama comes out. Let's read. When a person is tested, with something that touches his relationship with the Eibishter, which is not connected to reason at all. It's above reason. It touches the neshama. Now for the Kabbalists keeping score at home, and of course you're all Kabbalists, so I'm going to say it. Not the Chochma, which is mispashed b'chala guf kulei. Not the secondary idea of Chochma, which is ha-Chochma techaya b'aleh. How Chochma fills the whole body. But the Chochma in its source, the higher idea of Chochma, the primary idea of Chochma, the way Chochma is b'meach sheberosh in the brain, says the Heilige Rebbe Azai Hineira Mishinasa. This Yid, who's otherwise a Golus Yid, wakes up. Upayelas Paulasa, and it does what it needs to do, Bekeach Hashem, with the power of the Eibush Tamalubashwa, which is invested in the Chochma, and he's ready for Mesiras Nefesh, K'mei Kosav, as the Pasuk says, Vayikatz. The Eibush wakes up. Kiyashna Hashem, as if the Eibush had been sleeping. And of course, in this case, Vayikatz. Ani Yeshena V'li B'yer. I remember as a little boy reading my mom the Friedrich Rebbe, Ani Yeshena B'yalus. V'li B'yer is Vashlafen in Golus. He's trapped in Golus. But V'li is a pintel and a neshama which is never in Golus. It could sleep, but it's not in Golus. And when you have, unfortunately, the right conditions, it wakes up. L'hamei b'nisoyin, to overcome any test. Be'emunas Hashem, not to violate his loyalty, his connection to the Eibishter, And he does it b'lishum tam vadas, without any reason, without any understanding. V'seichel musad, an intuitive reasoning which he can access, lie to this person, without any seichel. There's no logic. It's raw, pure neshama. Le'ezgaber ala kippus, to be stronger than the klippus. V'tayves el mazen, the desires of this world, to the point of mesiras nefesh. And the Alter Rebbe says two more words: beheter u'isr, whether it's permitted or it's prohibited. How does the word beheter land over here? Talking about a Jew who doesn't care about anything. He's a Paltiel Yisrael, doesn't care about anything. And you touch that nerve, that Jewish nerve, which basically makes an nefesh. So that nerve affects what? Things that go to his very core. Things that go to his Yiddishkeit on the most basic level, which is the union of mesiras nefesh, not to become separate from the Eibishter. So Alter Rebbe says, I want to explain this to you. A minute before, so long as this neshama was sleeping, this person had no connection to anything. But a minute after, when the Yechidish of Nefesh is revealed, and the Pintel is revealed, it's not only the Pshat, that because the Pintel, the Nekudas Hayadus, this point of neshama emerges, this person is ready to be Meiz Nefesh Yechidish Hashem, this person is ready to be Meiz Nefesh for Koitzei Shal Yud. No detail in Judaism is too small. That's the dead head. If and when the neshama is aroused and revealed, his desire to serve Hashem is an even dvarim hamutarim. He doesn't want to eat an extra piece of cake. Yesterday, this person was shaychus to kol davar also, to everything which is not allowed. Today, not only is he not going to do an aveda, anything which is not avedas Hashem is meisa nefesh for beheter ubiyis. And I want you to know, I was a boy, 15, 16, 17. And I was out of town. I was in California. Then I went to Maristan. I was very little. I grew up in Crown Heights. Right? I'm brainwashed, closed-minded. Really, I am. When I was a child, my home was filled with Balei Tshuva. The 70s in Crown Heights was the golden age of Balei Tshuva. Our home, we had every personality in Lubavitch came through our home. I remember them. My father spent every Shabbos meal was a fabrengen about. Usually we had no idea what was going on, and if we knew what was going on, it was terrible. You understand? See, there were occasions my father told me to leave the room and that a boy of 9 or 10 didn't need an education on, or 12 even. But I never watched the process of tshuva. They were boys and girls learning in Hadarat Torah, learning in Maras Tanchles. But to witness the process of tshuva it's an amazing, for a frum person. To watch a person do tshuva it's a surreal experience, because you could never imagine that being you. You're frum. Your whole life is Teda Vaved. That's all you know. But you see people who have a whole different life, have an arousal, have an awakening that makes them so intent and so intense in their desire to be connected to the Eibishter that they're single-minded to the point of madness. Madness. And I, as a child, I was learning in Tamchet Mimim, and I went in Marstown. This kedem, it's format data. There's a gezera, yeda, u'leru tachtenim, I don't know if you guys understand Marstown. Upstairs is Tamchet Mimim, downstairs is the Feras B'churim, and it's a big gezera. You're not allowed to go from downstairs to upstairs and upstairs to downstairs. Why? Because upstairs you have a bunch of arrogant little boys, and upstairs you have sincere adults, and it's a bad mix. But I hung out downstairs. I was a bad Tomche boy. I hung out because the idea of tshuva blew my mind. I couldn't understand it, but I watched it. People do tshuva. And they're not Paish Yisrael and Kasher. They're Teneke Shanishbu. They never got a Jewish education. They didn't know anything. They never did Aveda in their life. But the tshuva process is absolutely incredible to watch. It's amazing. Their Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit is Bli Gevul. And when they discover that you're not as crazy as them, they turn on you. Hayatochen du bist doch ein kleiner cat. You're born and bred. What do we call ourselves? Geish. And I'm better than you. And then you know what happens after many months, whatever it's 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, that tshuva power subsides, and they have to deal with the same tests we have to deal with. It's a different angle, it's a different life experience, but the process of tshuva is unreal. When you watch someone do tshuva, you are witnessing Yechidish Nefesh. And it's not for 5 minutes, it could last for a few months. As a child, I knew people, who never stopped doing tshuva. Chayket HaZacha mentioned. Very few, but they were mamish holy. They were beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Jews. Beautiful Jews. But most Balei Tshuva have an experience of Tshuva which is overwhelming. And then, a Baal Tshuva once told me, Vestach, I did Tshuva and I was higher than a tzaddik and I became an FFB like the rest of us. And then they have to deal with that. Why? Because when the fire of Mesiras Nefesh passes, you have to accept that you're not a perfect Jew. It's very, very hard to accept that you're going to be Jewish and you're not going to be perfect. When you're in the throes of tshuva, you're in the Melega Mesiras Nefesh. It's Yechidish Nefesh. When that passes and you say, you know what? I still have anger, I still have lust, I still have a drug problem. For 5 months I didn't have a drug problem. Why? I was in Atzilus. I landed back in Asiya and my old drug problem came back and I got to deal with it. So then you have to figure out how to be frum, like we have to figure out how to be frum. But they had that moment of tshuva. What arouses it? And it's something happened. And I say the Rebbe dialed their number. I am so convinced that this whole tshuva moment is that the Rebbe goes around the world and he has a special feather. He finds neshamas and he touches them and boom, it flakets ayuf. And you have to be there wherever that person is and help that person do tshuva and help that person teach him how to live as a Jew and kiyum mitzvahs b'chaya yem when the passion and when the intensity of tshuva subsides. That he should make it into a lifetime. On Arichas Yom Hashanim Tevis, the Rebbe does the hard work. We have to pick up the pieces, and part of what we need to do in picking up the pieces is not mess it up. Pashat, nicht kalamachen. I actually believe that this is the process. A Rebbe, a Neshama, Klolis, a Nosiv Yisrael, who's connected to every Jew, b'chol mokem u'mokem, b'chol asar v'asar, touches a Yiddish Neshama. He has a Seder Tshuva, and he expects people around this person to help him go through the process of doing tshuva and learning how to be a Yid b'chaya yem yem and building a Yiddish life. And it's on us to finish what the Rebbe's Hisaydus begins. That's just my feeling. But here we're describing Mesiras Nefesh, where a Jew is facing a risk to his life physically, which is different than tshuva, not in the intensity, it's just different in the fear factor, right? The goy is going to kill him. And his neshama is aroused. And if and when his neshama is aroused, it's not only that he's ready to be Meis Nefesh Kiddush Hashem, he's prepared to give his life for Koyitzei Shel Yud. That's all the Rebbe says, Bei Beheter. It's mutter, it's kosher, it's allowed. But when the neshama is awoken, when the Yechidish Nefesh is aroused, comes out, the power from that Yechidish Nefesh affects that this Jew is Jewish to the extreme, even in the little details, in the nuts and bolts. And that's why I wanted to reread this, honestly, because I wanted to focus on this word. That not only will this person not permit himself an indulgence in something which is not allowed, he will not permit himself in indulgences that are permitted because they're not avodas Hashem. Because when the Yechida, when the Pintel Yid, when the Avam is awoken, the only thing this person knows is Atzmas himself, is the Eibishter. Let's read it. Beheter or be'isa, taivas, desires, lusts, weaknesses of this world, permitted one and prohibited one, shehurgal behem, which he's become accustomed to, and at the moment of tshuva, lemayis behem, he's disgusted by all of them, and instead, liv chelai adeshem, he chooses the eibish, the lachelke, or the gerolei as his portion and as his lot, lim selei nafshe, to give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu his neshama, al kedushas shemai, for the sake of sanctifying the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're going to Chanukah. Wow. So we can talk about this, that there's two in Yonim. I'm using my own words, but the State is Sfarim. There's something called Mesiras Nefesh, and there's something called Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. And they're very different. Mesiras Nefesh means I'm dying for a cause that I believe in. Mesiras Nefesh and al Kiddush Hashem means I'm dying for the cause of sanctifying the name of Hashem. It's not my cause. And Beklolos, that's the difference whether the Mesiras Nefesh comes from Madrega of Chaya. When a person is Meis in Madrega of Chaya, the way that works is if you're very devout, if you're very frum, if you're very learned, if you're very invested, so you're Meis Nefesh, not to become separate from HaKadosh Baruch. But when the Mesiras Nefesh comes from the Yechida, it's not about me at all. It's Al Kedushat Shmei, for the sanctity of the Eibishter's name, and all bets are off. There's no limits. There's no limits at all. And faket, and this higher madrega of Mesiras Nefesh, oftentimes the Jew who you would think is the least ready to be Mesiras Nefesh is standing by the highest madrega of Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. Va'af, even though Kya Klip is Govru Alav Kol Yamav, his whole life has been dominated by Klip. And he lost. He was a loser. It says in the Medrash, this is a person who, through Ribi Shikua, through Hergei Limraim, through bad habits, by doing things which you're not supposed to do over and over and over again, this person has literally lost control. Right? In America, we call that an addict. In Tanya, we call it Gullus. I have a soul, and I have no access to my soul because it's exiled, it's in jail, and I don't own the key. So a person never failed his tests. And because he failed his test, he became immersed, he became shakua, and dvarim loy toivim, and things which are undesirable, in a way that if he wanted to go out of it, he can't. He's a prisoner. Lo yachal kol yom. In other words, on this level, the Jew is compared to Klippa. Klippa always has the spark of the Eibishter. But in Klippa, the spark of the Eibishter has no ability to reveal itself. And if you remember the conversations we had the last couple of weeks before, and it's called Yamusu v'lei b'chochma. When a person is trapped in Klippa, it's the opposite of Chayim. It's called Mavis. It says the Rebbe Mekomokam nevertheless. When this Yid faces a test, and it's a test of faith which touches Amunah the Eibishter, says the Rebbe Sheyasei Dasa that the Eibishter connection, which is now being challenged, is founded, it has its foundation. The Kedesh in the holy mountain, which is Bechin Chachma Shabenef Shalakis, Shabbat, the Chachma Yiddish and Neshama, Shabbat Maluba Sheditzei Baruch Moshavein Save. So when Klippa attacks Kedusha, in her arms and in her legs, even in her heart and her lungs, it's possible that Kedusha should be Lo Yochale, should not be able to overcome it because he's a prisoner to Klippa. But when Klippa attaches Kedusha in the mind, in the brain, in the Chochmah Shabenefesh of Kedusha, it's never a prisoner. Says the Rebbe, Harikola Klippa V'Telem V'Tolim, the Klippas become nothing, V'Hayuk Lohai, they become completely non-existential, Mamish L'Fnei Hashem, and he brings the 4 psukim, which we learned about last week, which correspond to the Sholosh Klippas of Meis Lagamri, and the 4th pasuk corresponds to Klippas Noy. So to be honest, I didn't learn anything new. I simply repeated last week's class. Instead of spending 15 minutes on it, I spent 20 minutes, and I was able to, so to speak, flush out the points that I wished to flush out. And I'm sorry that Chaboiz Geshlab the Neshama. We're going to make now a break. We're going to do afterwards a Yem Yem. And Mitzvah, next time I'll be here, we'll finish this Pedic. In other words, the next Tanya class, I'm actually going to start on page 50. I'm not going to repeat it again. Okay, good morning and thank you all for coming.